Just say what you mean what you say.
She's an icon, she's a legend, and she is the moment.
Hello, 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 and welcome to Larisha Speaks. It's been a minute since I recorded, but I have a very interesting show for you today. I have a show in regards to the wrongful conviction of Morico Johnson out of Pennsylvania. We're going to be talking to his wife, Tanesha Johnson, and she's going to tell us all the details we need to know. I spoke with her in regards to this case as soon as I believe he was arrested, and I've been steady in contact with her throughout everything. The trial recently was over. He's scheduled to be sentenced in a couple of days. So we want to get this interview for you guys. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. Now we're going to welcome to the stage Tanesha Johnson.
Hello.
Hello. How you doing?
Hi, Larisha.
How you doing? So
I'm
today we're
fine.
here. I just did an introduction. I made it short but sweet. We're here to talk about Morico Johnson and
Yes.
his case. I believe it's the state of Pennsylvania.
State of Pennsylvania, Huntingdon County, Pennsylvania.
County, Pennsylvania. Okay, so let's. I want to start from the beginning.
Yes.
So we can start from the beginning. So, how did you guys meet? Where were you living, and how was everything going first?
So me and my husband, my name is Tanesha. My husband's name is Morico, and we met in New York. I was living in New York for about 11 or 12 years. I was on my way back to Virginia when I met Morico. I had some unfortunate incidents that had happened in New York with my son's father who had passed away. And I met Morico, and he was just a breath of fresh air. We talked all day, all night. I will say that one thing that really intrigued me about him is he was a man of his word, which was really refreshing at the time. So I ended up moving back to Virginia. A couple of months of me being in Virginia, he came and he proposed. He asked for my father's hand in marriage, and he also asked my son to could he have his mom's hand in marriage, which I thought was really super cute. And he did it, and he gave him a game too. So of course my son was like, "You can have her." I was like, wow. But we got married shortly after. He was still working in New York as a corrections officer. So he would travel back and forth from Newport News to New York for the first couple of months of our marriage. We got married in February.
Of what
By February 15th is our anniversary.
of what year?
2011.
Okay, 2011.
So we were married February 15th. It was supposed to be Valentine's Day, but we missed the mark. But he traveled about till April, and then he was off for the whole summer. And that September, he did what he needed to do, and he started working at Hampton Sheriff Department here in Virginia. So we got married. We had our first house. We've been married now for 12 years. But when he was arrested, it was 10. So we at the 10-year mark when this happened, it was December 2019. My husband had worked in law enforcement for over 12 years. He had recently stopped working for the sheriff department. He had worked for Hampton Sheriff and Newport News. And he had started his own trucking business. So we were building this business. He had dreams of building it for his family. We have a lot of sons. We only have one daughter. And so this was something that he wanted to build for his family. And he was doing very well. Unexpectedly, in December, we got a knock on the door. And it was 2019.
2019.
We got a knock on the door, and it was 2 detectives from Pennsylvania and 2 detectives from Virginia. And they asked, could they speak to my husband? He wasn't at home at the time. So I told them they'd have to come back later. He would be home probably around 5, 6 o'clock. They said they would come back. I immediately called Morico, and I said, there was 2 detectives at the door, and they want to speak to you. And he was like, detectives? He was like, well, I'll be home about 5:30, 6 o'clock. So he gets home, they come back. He lets them in our home. The whole time I was very reluctant because as an African-American man and woman, we are taught not to speak to the police. But having a husband who has a law enforcement career, I felt like he knew what he was doing, even though I felt reluctant. He talked to them for over an hour. answered all their questions. They asked him, would he be willing to give them a DNA sample? He gave them a buccal swab. They left. We never thought we'd see them again. Well, they popped back up 7 months later. And when they came back, my husband's words were, I'm a Black man in America. I think I need to get a lawyer because something's so of course, immediately I called him. And at that point, we literally got a lawyer that day.
Okay.
So there was sometimes it's nice to know somebody who knows somebody. So we got a lawyer that day. The retainer was paid that day. The lawyer got in contact with them. That it was either that day or the next day. I have the emails from when I sent the lawyer, but I do remember it was June, July when they came back. So when the lawyer talked to them, there were some other things that he found out about the situation, that these girls had been involved in drug trafficking. There was a DNA phenotype and genealogy test that my husband. Yes.
When they first questioned him, did he know what they were questioning him about?
Yes, they asked him specifically about, did he know Christine McWhorter? And he said, yes, he did know Christine McWhorter. He used to date this girl named Cynthia Swan in Pennsylvania, and that was her best friend. They asked him, did he know Beatrice McDaniels? He didn't know Beatrice McDaniels. He didn't know who that was, but he did know Cynthia. He told them that he knew her basically in passing, that basically they'd better off asking Cynthia about her best friend because he only saw her a handful of times, like in passing. There was like one event where it was a friend's birthday where they went to a bar for a couple of hours, but that was the only time they really hung out. Anytime they saw each other, it was mostly at Cynthia's mom's house because that's where she was living at in Mount Union, Pennsylvania at the time. So when she would stop by. So he didn't know details about her. He just knew who she was. The other lady, he did not know. So he gave them the DNA swab, and he actually thought he thought he was helping. He thought he did a good deed. Like maybe that will help them find who they're looking for. They can narrow down, because they did tell him he wasn't a suspect. He was a person of interest, and that there were other people that they were talking to because of this description that they had from this DNA phenotype test. So fast forward to 7 months when they came back, the lawyer got involved and talked to them. They would not give his lawyer the results of his DNA test. Now, I was clueless to how long it takes for a DNA test to come back. So, but apparently it was back by 7 months, right? So they wouldn't give him the results. The lawyer sat us down, met with us, and talked to us about some things he found out about the case. These girls had been involved in drug trafficking. The feds were involved because of the amount of drugs, and they had ended up arresting 11 people out of their apartment complex connected to the drug trafficking of what they found in this girl's home. There was someone who had confessed to these murders, and the description of that person was a Caucasian male. Okay. And one thing he said was, there was all these things out there already about the murder because it was a cold case. This happened in 2009. We're now in 2020 because they came December 2019. This is 7 months later, 2020. And he just couldn't see how my husband fit into this, besides he dated her best friend, right? So, but he did tell them that if, Morico was still willing to speak to them, but just with his lawyer at this point, because he never thought they would come back. But they never contacted his lawyer to speak to him. And we didn't worry. When you're innocent, you don't worry that something like this is going to happen to you. I'm very aware about stuff. So no phone numbers changed, no address changed. He continued to build his business. We went on with our regular day-to-day activity, feeling confident that we had coverage, that if anything, we had a lawyer who was a barrier to, we didn't have to have any surprises or anything. And he proclaimed his innocence. He's like, this is crazy. So kept building his business. 2.5 years go by. One day we are leaving out the house, about to take our kids to Taekwondo. My husband goes outside to move his truck. He went outside to move his truck because it was Memorial Day weekend. And our office called from our apartment and asked him, could he move his truck? They never called him to ask him to move his truck before. But they said because it's the holiday, they're trying to free up parking. Could he move his truck across the street? He says, sure. So I'm getting the boys ready for Taekwondo. My youngest son is looking out the window. Morico goes outside to move his truck. My little son says, Mom, they're arresting Dad. And I didn't even immediately jump up because it sounded so ludicrous. And I said probably the stupidest thing, like, your dad? And he said, they're arresting Dad. I look outside. There are trucks. There are men with guns. He is on the ground. I feel like I'm looking at a movie, like what is happening? This is 2.5 years later from that initial visit. I run outside. They whisk him away so quickly. There was no answers. This was like 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I immediately called the lawyer. Of course, the lawyer is calling down to the jail. I don't know what to do. I didn't speak to Morico till 12 o'clock that evening. And what he said to me was, they're charging me with 2 counts of criminal homicide. They only really came to speak to him about one person. They charged him with both of these women. One he didn't even know. So that's where this fight began, is when they charged him. He went for a court date the following days to be expedited.
And you guys are living in Virginia.
We are in Virginia.
And they took him from Virginia to Pennsylvania.
They expedited him, or whatever you call it, back to Pennsylvania in about 2 or 3 weeks after that. So he was here for another 2 weeks, and then they sent him to Pennsylvania. His lawyer advised him to not fight the extradition, because the way I guess it works is if they knew that was the person, they had been there, right? So that would just delay things more. And we wanted to get to our day in court. There was no bond once we got to Pennsylvania. There was no bond. He hasn't had any bond, and was in jail ever since that day. So the next 2 years was about fighting for him. And a lot happened in those 2 years, when dealing with the legal system. The first point of shock you have to get through is the fact that if you don't have the proper legal representation, your loved one is as good as gone. Especially if they are Black. So, Morico.
Any N-word will do is how the law sees Black people when it comes to these charges.
Basically. And he was prepared for everything else, life insurance, this insurance, but nobody is prepared for if I'm wrongly convicted insurance. Like
wrongly charged.
Insurance, right?
Okay, so the first thing I said is little keys and notes that we want to point. So the first thing that I want to make sure that everybody is aware of in this interview, why we say is a wrongful conviction, is that the number one, the police said that they had a suspect, and the suspect was Caucasian, and a person had confessed to it. So the fact that you have a crime, you have a murder, the fact that you have a confession to this murder, and the fact that the race of that person is different from the race of your husband, that's one key interest that, when I got this story about wrongful conviction, because I don't know how you can get it wrong from there.
Right. So this cold case had 2 set of detectives. The first set is where that particular person came in. He confessed to multiple people that he knew, and multiple people were telling the police that he is saying he's the one who did it. The mystery in that is, what did y'all do about that?
Nothing, because he had the complexion for the protection.
I mean, literally, people were saying to the police, he first of all, he was someone who was in the drug business with them, okay, who was an associate, who knew them very well, who was never seen around town. This is a small town, okay? This is not like a big, like New York City. This is Mount Union, 2,000 people, Huntington County, 2,000 people. You know what I'm saying? It's a small area. They were supplying this area, but he was never seen around town with large amounts of drugs. The week after they were murdered, he was seen around town with large amounts of drugs. How did the police know that some of the drugs were missing? Because they have her text messages, her phone calls. He didn't get all the drugs. Some of them were still in the house. Some of them were missing. So they knew exactly how much she went to pick up, all this, you know? And I'm
And
like,
the police
it
saying
boggles me.
basically, I'm sorry, but the police saying basically these two people were murdered as a result of this drug deal going bad.
That was the initial conception that the now DA, no, the judge, the head judge, Judge Zanuck, who was the DA at the time, he made several statements in the newspaper that these murders were drug motivated. I mean, 2 and 2 got to equal 4. You know, they had text messages, they had phone calls,
They had a
what
confession.
they had a
They had a
confession,
witness.
multiple people. Like, this is where we are. So when the second set of detectives, that case ran cold and another set picked it up, they started with this DNA phenotype and genealogy. Now, this is where it gets tricky with Morico, right? There's a little company called Parabon that does, and it's all over the news. Police are using this all the time. But even by their own admission, it's a clue. It is not supposed to get anyone arrested or sent to jail just based off of what they said. So there's 2 parts. There's a genealogy where they take DNA and they trace your genealogical roots back to who this possibly could be in a family tree. That in itself is tricky because when you start looking into DNA and genealogy, you start learning that you can have similarities with a person just by the region you live in. You know, when you live in a small town and your family has lived there and their family has lived there and their family, you can have similarities just to that. You know, it's a really, really tricky thing. So out of that genealogy, there were 4 suspects. All 4 of those suspects were related in Morico's family. It was Morico, his brother, Carol Johnson, his brother's brother, Mark Johnson, and a cousin that this genealogy report came up with. Okay. That they're allegedly saying this genealogy report came up with. Okay. Then there was a snapshot picture, which said the person was medium to light skin, African American male. The blood that they claimed was my husband that was on the stairs. It was a drop of blood on the stairs, a drop of blood on the back door. Medium to light skin, African American male with hazel or green eyes, no freckles. Morico is all of those things, except he doesn't have hazel or green eyes. His eyes are all gray. His brother's eyes are all gray. Mark Johnson and the cousin, I'm not sure what their facial features look like that much as far as their eye color, but I know my husband's does not have hazel or green eyes, and my brother's brother does not have hazel or green eyes. I do know that Christine, one of the victims, her baby daddy has green eyes. Her son has hazel eyes. So light brown. Hazel is like light brown, you know. But I know a lot of African American males with funny colored eyes also. So the description is too vague, and it's like the other podcast that we had done earlier, Pick a Nigga DNA. I mean, in this situation, how can you call it anything else when it doesn't pick the correct suspect, right?
And it doesn't, it's not okay, so with the DNA. So let's go back to, so we know that there's an issue with the DNA. They're
There's an issue
saying
with
that
the
his
DNA.
DNA was found on the stairs and on the back door. Now, in
So
regards to the DNA, his DNA could have, when he gave it to them, he could have gave them the DNA and for them to say all of a sudden this was the DNA found.
now
But
that is a
let's go
big
when he was
question.
arrested. Let's go when he was arrested and he was facing the charges and you had your attorney and let's the what the police was saying, because remember they had a confession
Mm-hmm.
and they had a statement. So how was that with him being arrested? Because that's, I believe that's when I met you in your fight, as soon as he was arrested.
What I want to tell you is when he was arrested was the first time I saw the criminal complaint, the piece of paper that a judge signs to get you arrested. And that criminal complaint said that he willingly gave his DNA December 2019. That DNA that he gave came back positive January 2020, a month later. But they didn't arrest him for another 2.5 years. For the last 2 years, we've been trying to figure it out what they've been doing for the last 2.5 years, because I don't know any other police department or detective that leaves a murderer out for 2.5 years. Someone that you suspect did a heinous crime for 2.5 years.
Law enforcement is incompetent, so they don't know what they're doing. They're literally throwing SHIT at the wall and see what sticks, so they don't know what they're doing.
That basically, that's what they did, is build a case around him. They
I think it's
claim
because they know that they didn't have any other evidence on him, but all of a sudden how this DNA match, which is, again, we don't know how the DNA matched, just because they say a match, and we have a suspect who was white.
even in that, the DNA is not enough, because these girls were unalived upstairs in their bedroom, execution style, by someone that they let in the house. That's why there's a witness to the murder, the little boy. It was 12 something at night. He knocked on the door. The aunt let him in, went upstairs. He shot them execution style in the head. This DNA that they're talking about was found on the bottom step, a drop of blood on the bottom step. There was a drop of blood on the back door. And there was also blood there that they didn't even test. Okay, we'll get into that later, because my husband's lawyer tested some blood that was not even in there. And that's where there was a big surprise that came in. Yeah. So first of all, that's what got my suspicions up, is because it was 2.5 years later. And I'm like, it's got to be something else. They have to have something else that I don't know about on my husband, telling me that DNA matched. It's got to be something else. Okay, the DNA match, you have to, nothing else. So in Pennsylvania, you don't need a motive. They claim for those 2.5 years, they were looking for a motive. There's no motive to this case. There's no reason why. He was dating this girl, and her best friend and aunt were murdered. There's no motive.
So in regards to, your attorney, so you had the same attorney throughout the whole case?
Throughout the whole case, we had attorney Jonathan Sims.
And what was some of the issues? Some of the issues with this was, number one, your husband at the time was working in, I believe it was
in trucking.
No, at the time of that, he was the murder.
At the murders, he was a corrections officer.
So he was a correction officer in New York.
He was a corrections officer living in New York and traveling for almost 5 hours to see this girl in Pennsylvania.
How often would he see her?
From the trial, once or twice a month. Sometimes if he had off, like during the weekend, he would stay the weekend and then travel.
So he had a long distance relationship with somebody, and her friend basically got murdered, and he was the prime suspect because he was Black. Even though a white person confessed, and a white person was eyewitness testimony that this was the person who they let in and did it. But it was a Black person who happened to know. I'm going to keep making sure I put that out there.
Reiterate. Yeah, because it was said in the trial to Colleen Spade. You have to understand, they questioned, this was a 4-year-old boy at the time that they questioned throughout the years. Not only to friends and family, different police agencies, the description never changed. That's why it's so significant. So you're not talking about just questioning him once that month. No, he was questioned throughout a long, extensive period of time, and his never changed. As a matter of fact, at the trial, he said he thought the person who came in was his father, and he hugged that person's leg until he realized it wasn't his father. If you look at my husband and you look at his father, there is a stark difference. His father is probably about 6 foot, light skin. My husband is about 5'5". My husband is heavy set. His father is thin. Like it's a very big difference.
Is his father white?
I think his father may have Caucasian in him. He might be mixed, but he's a light-skinned African-American male with green eyes.
Oh, okay. Which is what the DNA genotype said of the person who committed the crime. Yes. So the person who this child let in said that the person he thought was his father fits the genotype of the DNA that was discovered.
Absolutely.
Somehow they got somebody
Absolutely.
else.
Absolutely.
And the police, the prosecutor basically said that he committed this crime, even though he was working. Wouldn't explain in regards to his work schedule.
So this crime happened on January 2nd, 2009. Morico was off on January 2nd, but he worked a double shift on the 3rd, which started at 7 a.m., which means he had to be at work at 6:45. So he was off the 1st. I think he was off the 31st, the 1st, and the 2nd. On the 1st, this is information that was found out in the trial. There is a call from Christine, the victim's phone, to Morico's phone. We know that call is from his girlfriend because immediately after the call from Morico was a call to the boy she was messing with down there named Benjamin June. So
Boy, who was messing with Morico's girlfriend?
Morico's girlfriend at the time. She was messing with another man. So December 31st at 12:03, 12:00, there's like 3 different times, but they're right around the time where you call and tell somebody Happy New Year. Like 12:03, 12:07, 12:11, his phone number pops up in Christine's phone. And then immediately after that, she called Benjamin June also to do the same thing. The story is that Cynthia was supposed to travel back to Mount Union from Philly to go stay with Christine that weekend. But instead she chose to stay in Philly with the other dude, Benjamin June. So the story, the theory that the prosecutor had was Morico is a jealous lover. And he drove 4 hours, 5 hours to Mount Union sometime after these girls were killed in between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. January 2nd that night. So he drove to her best friend's house, killed her best friend and her best friend's aunt. Then remember, it's nighttime. It's 11, 12, 1 in the morning. And on the 3rd, he has to work at 7 a.m. He has to be there by 6:15. I mean,
So he gonna kill
6:45.
somebody that ain't even cheating on him. So he just killing somebody else. And then he gonna go to work and do a 16-hour shift.
Yes. As a corrections officer, he's going to go in the jail after he just murdered. I mean, I know there's crazy people in this world,
Yes,
but
but that is
sometimes you
just
have
to
to
the
look
point
at the
where.
person.
But listen, but even if you come up with the facts of the case, and this is the issue that I have with juries really don't come up with their own questions. You have juries now that are sheep, and whatever the prosecutors say about how a case is laid out, they don't think for themselves to question, well,
Nope.
wait a minute. Well, wait a minute, wait a minute. It's too many issues with this case where common sense should sink in and say, well, wait a minute.
That doesn't make sense.
Why would he murder 2 people who had nothing to do with his jealous rage for somebody who wasn't even there? And then what about the drugs?
She's still alive.
Not even, but what about the drugs? They're not accusing him of taking drugs or having the drugs or anything. And the issue with the drugs, the FBI is involved, the state is involved. Well, that issue just disappeared. What I think about this case, I believe that the person who did it is an FBI informant and they're protected, and they have to have somebody else to go down for it because this person has to keep their cover. But, I'm just the person who worked in law enforcement and who has common sense, but that's what it looked like to me. So any N-word will do, and he just happened to be the N-word. But
I believe you. After
how
what I've
can
seen in
the
these last 2
person you are
years,
targeting, the person who cheated on you, the person you're so jealous, you don't hurt her or harm her. You harm 2 other people that got nothing to do with her, and then show up for work to do 16 hours, and it's a 4-hour drive there and a 4-hour drive back.
and wouldn't that make her kind of like in cahoots?
But what about at midnight when the call was placed? Where was he at? Because just like they got cell towers, because he would already had to be in the area to commit the murder. If he got to be back with them, if he got to be to work at 6:45.
There's a problem with this cold case because none of those things came up. I will say that first of all, Morico wasn't even on the radar, so they never got cell phone stuff or data from him back then in 2009. It's now even 2019. Going back that far, I don't even think you can get cell phone records that far because that would have been a key piece of evidence of
You
where
can.
he was.
You
You
can.
can?
Yes. With NASA, yes, you should be able to get cell phone evidence. Okay, where was Morocco? Where did Morocco? I'm saying his name wrong. Where did he
Morico.
say he was that night?
He was in New York.
He was in New York City that night. And does he have
So
witness to his alibi that where he was with, who he was with?
do you remember what you did on New Year's Eve in 2009?
I was in the bed, probably.
Right. So what we do know about Morico is that he's very routine because he has been in law enforcement so much. So I have a father who's military, and he's very routine on the holidays because him and his ex were not together for a long period of time. Most likely he was with his children. Um, when I met him, he was spending summers in Baltimore with his children. He would work all year long, do swaps, and then spend the summer, have June, July, August off, and spend it in Baltimore with his kids. That was his time off. So we know his routine, but there's no cell
Not
phone
sure.
records of him.
If somebody comes to you 10 years from now and say, where were you 10 years ago? Especially if you don't know that you need an alibi.
He's
You just
not a
read about it.
partier. You know what I'm
But he
saying? He
know
was
he
like, I
didn't
know I
commit no
wasn't at a
murder.
partier. I had to.
He know he didn't commit no murder. So that's
Exactly.
key to the whole. And it doesn't even seem like it's possible for him to be able to go 4 hours to commit the murders, then 4 hours to go back to be at work at
It's actually
6:45.
almost 5.
I'm sorry?
It's like 4 hours, 50 something minutes.
Yeah, but even with the toll, and cameras and things like that, it's not possible. It's not. You would have to stop for gas. He would have to have, they could do credit card statements if you pay gas in cash. There's no way possible for him to be able to even be a suspect, because it's just the fact that they want him to be. That's from what I've seen, from my observation of getting the information for this case. He is.
Well, I told you what the key piece of evidence for Morico was in this case. And this is something that allegedly, because we have to word things a certain way, right? Was being kept from his lawyer for a while. Of course, they denied it, but through the 2 years, I've seen the judge almost hold several people in contempt on that side for withholding information. Okay. And one of those things was DNA. Christine had DNA under her nails, and Beatrice had a blood stain on her shirt. Those were tested by Morico's DNA expert, who, I don't have the page where her name is on, and I really want to shout her out because she is an Indian lady, and she has developed DNA technology. But she did the DNA on those two things, and she normally testifies for the prosecution. She normally does not testify for the defense. That DNA was found to be unidentified male blood DNA under Christine's nails and on Beatrice's shirt, and it excluded Morico.
Oh wow. Okay, I think
It wasn't his.
Okay. And this was brought up at trial.
This was brought up at trial. Yep.
And the jury still.
I don't know how they missed that. I'm still confused to this day how they missed that.
And what was the makeup of the jury?
He had an all-white jury.
Oh, okay. Sounds about white to me.
Uma Nasir. That's her name.
Uma Nasir.
Uma Nasir. Dr. Nasir.
So let's get, there's another key point. In addition to there being a witness who said the person was Caucasian, and there being a confession of a person who was Caucasian, and there being some type of drug arrest in the area, and several people were arrested with drugs, and a number of drugs were missing, and the person who confessed was in the area, a well-known drug dealer. And now we have a DNA sample under the nails of one of the victims, was DNA sample, and blood on another victim was also tested, and
Very
the
clear
DNA,
blood that you could see on her shirt that they
and that
tested.
DNA was tested, and
Morico.
Morico was cleared that was not his DNA.
Not his DNA. So let me tell you how crafty they are. They even
Make it
played,
up as they go along.
yes, but they played the tapes in court of me and him conversating in the jail when he kept saying, there's something wrong, Tanesha. I'm innocent of this. Look how strategic this blood is. Like, it's who's bleeding, just you're upstairs killing somebody and the blood is just on the bottom step. Number two, the key witness, Colleen, said that the person went out the front door. They tested blood on the back door. Okay. But they opened up 100 pieces of evidence out of the room that these girls were killed in. None of Morico's DNA on anything. Nothing. Clean. The
And
other
obviously
DNA
it
that
had
was
to be a sign
tested,
of a struggle.
I mean, I would think if there's unidentified blood DNA under someone's nails, what does that say to you if a woman has passed away and is a man? There you go.
It was a struggle. I have DNA, but they don't have that person's DNA. And I believe when he gave his DNA, that's where they said we found DNA was found later, and they made it fit.
It's possible because the lab that Morico that did the DNA test, I can't find the report. His lawyer has it. They were sued not too long ago. There was a tech in there that was falsifying reports, and people were going to jail. Yeah,
reports. That's part of the corruption of the court and how any N-word will do.
Pennsylvania is very corrupt.
Pennsylvania is the KKK. Understand, Pennsylvania is the state that the bombing and move that happened in May of 1985, where they killed 11 people who were running out of fire and they aimed at them. Pennsylvania racism, the same state that wrongfully incarcerated Meek Mill, had him on probation for 10 years on a BS charges that he never did in the first place. The same place that had Bill Cosby, after they said we won't bring you up on charges, decided, well, you black, let's bring you up on charges. The same state that had political prisoners still incarcerated at the same time. Pennsylvania is very, very racist. They're not by accident. Literally, the entire law enforcement community is the KKK.
There's a good old point system, and they work together.
It's the KKK.
So this is why this interview is so important for people to understand. Yes, this is happening in Pennsylvania, but it's not just happening to Morico. There are other people there who are innocent. Okay. And they have been torn away from their families. Their family lives have been destroyed. These people don't care. This is the part that makes me a little angry. They don't care about your children. I have black sons.
And this is why I started this podcast. This is why I started this fight, because I started seeing firsthand that any N-word would do was their motto. That is the purpose.
And we gotta wake up.
Community. And a lot of people know and are aware of that's their motto. They know that any N-word will do. The problem is they don't know how to combat that. Because when you have the government, and these are state sanctioned corruption of the court cases. We just have a case where in St. Louis, Missouri, where this individual was literally put to death based off of DNA, and they said that he was exonerated based off the DNA, and they still put him to death.
They still killed him.
There's another case today out of, I believe it was New York, where this man was in prison for 40 years, and he was released on parole for, I forgot, a number of years, but he's about to be exonerated because the last governor, like, this is the system. That's what I want people to understand about the system. That's why I wrote the book. That's why I fight. The system can say that you have a black person who girlfriend friend got murdered because she's in a drug I don't even know, network drug trauma, drug related offenses that had nothing to do with him, but because he knew of her.
And let's say this, that he has never used drugs, has no criminal history, law enforcement career for over 12 years, and he's the suspect.
Simply because they can make him the suspect, and they can't even come up with a motive. Why would he unalive two people because he's in a jealous rage over somebody who wasn't even there? And how do you drive 4 hours to a place in 4 hours and then get to work on time for a 7 o'clock shift?
After killing 2 people, murdering 2 people.
And they said that the murder was between 11 and
1. Oh,
so if it was
that's
between
another
the
thing.
midnight, he was on the phone with her. So that means it had to be within that 1 hour, 12 and 1.
No, the midnight call was New Year's Eve. So you have New Year's Eve, January 1st, nothing happens. Christine travels back to Mount Union. Okay. On the 2nd, she's killed sometime that night between 11 and 1. Okay.
Oh.
So when we get to the trial and people are asked, there were several people who testified who I guess a group of girls had got together. They asked, was Morico there? Was he supposed to come there? No. No. People testified they didn't even know who Morico was. Like the next
And
door neighbor
his
who found
girlfriend
him
was in,
deceased.
and the
She didn't know
girlfriend was in Philadelphia.
his girlfriend was in Philadelphia.
So she wasn't even in the location.
She wasn't even at the location. She stayed in Philly with another man. So you have the next door neighbor who testified who didn't know who Morico was. There's a lot of things that happen in the trial that are just mind blowing. Like,
give me some of them. Give me some example of mind blowing. This is again a case for corruption. Give me some of the mind blowing. Besides the fact that the DNA was tested and Morico was ruled out, the witness, the
number one, the doctor who did their autopsy, they didn't have a time of death till trial.
oh, convenient.
They didn't have a time of death. He got on the stand and said he weighed them by picking them off of one bed to another. So they both weighed 250 pounds. My God. Dr. Camro. Okay. He's been a doctor there for 30 something years, and he was visibly upset when Morico's lawyer cross-examined him, because the report, what he did was he marked corrections on his report. Because when we went to it was another hearing that he had talked to the doctor, and he had their deaths as PM instead of AM. The wrong time of death was on the report. Changed it then. And when we got to trial, he hadn't changed anything. Now, mind you, this is 2 years ago. He was supposed to change the report to the correct and make redactions. He didn't do it. So on the stand, he was a little bit humiliated, and the judge made him change the report, because the report that the jury had was the old report. It wasn't even the updated report, the new report. It was the old report. And then he had marked certain stuff on his report that he needed to remember like 5 minutes before he came in to testify. So he had to change that whole thing. Where he had them shot at was wrong. The negligence. They treated these girls like niggas. The incompetence. The lawyer pointed out how pictures that they took, you could see how stuff was moved around. The crime scene, like, moved all around. Blood samples weren't taken from places that, okay, we're going to take this blood sample and that blood sample, but leave this one. We don't know whose that one is.
And remember, they didn't even take the blood sample of under her nails. And
They had it. They had it.
No, but they didn't test it against his DNA once he
Allegedly.
got it. That's 101 law and order.
Allegedly. That's what we're going to say, because maybe they didn't like the results.
That too. But that speaks for the incompetence of the court. I don't think people realize how incompetent the courts really are. The judicial system it's very, very incompetent. But the thing about the incompetence that it'll always be a mystery to me is how can a jury go along with that regardless of the facts? Because the prosecutor says this is what happened, even though they don't have any 1, 2, 3 to line up with it. It doesn't matter. You have an all-white jury, a black person, that person is guilty. And it's not even, it's sad that black people literally have their life in the hands of people who want to see them guilty. That are not even willing to fight. And that's why I tell black people all the time, if you get the opportunity to be on a jury, please do. Because
I want to be on a jury now.
You really have to see the evidence that's presented and how it's presented, because certain people they go on a jury all the time and they look at it as a business and they don't mind, and they never give Black people the reason of the benefit of the doubt. We are
Mhm.
guilty simply because we are born Black.
That was said to me by a resident in that town. When we went out for lunch, I went to certain places, and I had a lady came up to me. She was a Caucasian lady, and she was originally from New York. And I'm not going to mention her name because she has to live there, but I appreciate her. She knows who she is. And she said, Tanesha, a lot of people in this town have been watching this because it was on the news and
And
everything.
you were going ham with your
Yeah.
interview.
Yes. Amen. Um, but she said a lot of people are watching this and something's wrong. She said, this isn't the first time we've seen this in this town. She said, but I'm going to tell you like this. Because I'd seen her several times. She said, I didn't want to tell you this yesterday until after the verdict because I didn't think you would believe me or you would probably be angry about what I said. She said, but your husband was guilty from day one because of the color of his skin. She said, I know where I live at. She said, I wouldn't be surprised if, because the jury, they deliberated an hour and a half one day and an hour and a half the next day for a 2-week trial with that many witnesses, that much information, cold case. It was a lot.
It was too
She
much
said, I'm
doubt.
not surprised if they were just having coffee and it was already determined what the verdict was going to be.
It's too much doubt for you to say that this person is guilty when how is this person going to work within that short of a time, working a shift, living his life for, and how long from '09 when he was arrested in 2020? When was he arrested? In 2020?
29. He was arrested in 2022.
2022. And they
This
couldn't even
visit,
come
the
up with a
first visit
motive.
came in 2019.
But the arrest, from the time of the arrest to the time of the charges, is just.
Mhm. It makes
And
no sense.
what mind state is he in now? How is he doing?
So me and Morico, we do a lot of Bible study. So my faith has grown. Even with this conviction, my faith has grown because I've seen, you know how sometimes God can put things into hindsight, and I was distraught in the beginning. And I have my days. You could catch me like right now, I'm having an interview with you this afternoon. I'll be in tears because I have so much anger. I'm mad. Um, but one thing that has been ever present in this whole situation is that faith without works is dead. So this is maybe a podcast that somebody may watch, but this is my everyday life. I wake up with it. I go to bed with it. This is not just about my husband. I have 3 Black males that I'm raising. And where I used to tell them, you have to be careful where you go and who you hang out with. Now it's, guess what? You could be convicted just because. And
And
that's not
that,
our justice.
and this is what I tell Black people. I tell Black people this, and I will forever say this: do not talk to the police at all. Don't
Never.
give any statements. Don't. Can I have your DNA? Can I search? Never waive your rights. If they wanted DNA, they would have to go to an attorney and have the legal, and they don't have that in this case.
And then
But
there would
because
be
he gave
checks
it
and
willingly,
balances.
and because he gave it willingly, they were able to do whatever they wanted to do. And he was thinking, look, you could easily knock me off the list as a viable suspect, and you can get to the real person because I'm going to help you out.
Yeah.
But when I say don't talk to the police at all, don't. There's nothing you need to say. They knock on your door. Why are you opening your door? Like, I don't think people understand when I say you have a right not to open your door just because they knock. Who do they think they are just because they knock on the door? Like, I don't care. Like, I'm so adamant about that. I don't
And
knock on my
just think
door. I'm
about
not
that.
going to
Think
answer.
about
I'm not going to answer.
having the courtesy of letting someone in your home,
Yeah, I don't know.
talking to
That's
them. They
not
thought
the
that
slave
he
patrol.
thought that they would respect the fact that he was ex-law
And
enforcement.
that's the thing. We have to really start really reevaluating how we see law enforcement, because
Mhm.
we keep seeing them with this ideal as we
That they
are
want to do
people.
the right thing.
They don't.
They
They
don't.
want to can get a Black person that they convict of a crime as
They
a
want to
Black
convict.
person who was brought up under false departmental charges simply because they could, and
Mhm.
illegally fire me and legally incarcerate after me seeing how, wait a minute, I got degrees. They don't care about
They
nothing.
don't care.
Black people should not be saying anything to the police at all. They knock on your door, let them knock.
And so now we have to be mindful now, because now he's convicted and Morico wants to make a statement at his sentencing, and he's advised not to.
No,
And I
because once he's a
understand.
convicted felon, he's a slave.
That's it. It doesn't matter what he says now. And the last thing you want to do when you are going to an appeal is get up there and talk about how you didn't do it, which makes no sense, because as an innocent person, you're going, I'm innocent.
They don't care.
They don't care.
Common sense. They don't care. So we have to really change what we think we're supposed to be doing and how we treat these people. And we have to start understanding who they are. They are aware that their system only targets. That's why every time you see a person in politics, whether it's governor, president, senator, whatever, the first thing they say they'll do for Black people is criminal justice reform. Because they know that the criminal justice system targets Black people only. So they think by them, quote unquote, reforming it or making corrections, it's being done to help us, because they know that the system targets us. So I don't think people really need to understand the sole purpose of law enforcement. The sole purpose of the judicial branch in government is to ensure that Black people are slaves, period, by any means necessary.
It's a
They don't
business.
care if you're innocent. They don't care
They don't
about
care.
They care that if you are a Black person, you are guilty of this crime because they say so. That's why you have sentencing disparities. That's why you have white people who are guilty of charges, but they get the slap on the wrist and they don't get the same sentence as a Black person. That is why I wrote the book. Is there anything else you want to say in the end? His sentencing is coming up, I believe it's October the 17th.
Sentencing is October 17th.
And you guys do plan to appeal.
We do plan to appeal, but I will tell you that the lawyer that we have is going to withdraw after this. It's money. It's money, number one. And I'm going to be honest with you. Resources are needed. We want to do this appeal the right way. We know where we are in this town, and we know that Morico will most likely not have a fair shot with these court-appointed lawyers because he is indigent now.
Are you still in Pennsylvania or are you in Virginia?
I've been in Virginia the whole time.
Okay, so you're in Virginia.
I'm in Virginia. Yes, I've been in Virginia the whole time. So resources is what we need. This is the type of thing you can't stop fighting, because it's not just him I'm fighting for. Now that my eyes are open and I understand what this system is not just doing to me, that has done to a lot of other people, because I've talked to them. One thing I started to do to get back into the workforce before my Uber job went away was I talked to a lot of people, and I was mind blown by the amount of people who had stories where I thought my story was such a big, like, it feels like a movie. And then people started telling me their stories. And I realized that this is happening to a lot of people. It's happening to mothers, and because it's happening to a lot of people. And why aren't we doing something?
We are, and that's the key. We are doing something. This reminds me of in slavery days, because everything goes to slavery days. In slavery days, they would take us and sell us, and then everybody would have the similar story. And then they would torture us. The state is doing the exact same thing they did in slavery days. They're only changing the name of what they're doing to us. But by them taking the slaves,
it's the new Jim Crow.
That's literally what's happening. So that's why we have so many people with stories, and we believe the stories when we hear somebody illegally incarcerated, where the United States government literally created the problem of drugs. So they create the solution, the war on drugs. And it really wasn't a war on drugs. It was a war on Black people, because soon as certain people who looked like them had issues with drugs, and now it's mental health crisis, and we have
mental health crisis.
So we understand what it is. It's not confusing.
I want people to know Morico's sentencing is October 17th. To keep up with his story, support if you can, resources if you can. And I really want people, because what I've learned in the past 2 years is that when you're dealing with something so big that's not affecting your family, I know you can feel like you don't know what to do, right? Like you're dealing with a government machine that has all the resources, has all the money to throw your loved one in jail, right? But you have to continue to remember that together we are stronger. So I don't care if you can't support one way, you can support another way. You can repost, you can tell somebody, you could be
Sharing.
aware, because this fight is not just about my family, it's for your family too. If it can happen to Morico, it can happen to you.
And I mean, it has. It has happened to my family, several of my family.
I know you
Several.
know.
And the thing is, it's a matter of wording. We really don't word how what they do to us.
Yeah.
We talk about injustice. It's not injustice, it's targeted. It's
It's
not like
targeted.
it's targeted
His civil
treatment.
rights have
So
been taken for something that he didn't
And,
do.
and they literally can do it just because they don't care that they don't have a good, oh, you had your day in court. Oh, well, you had a trial. So why are you complaining? Even though the trial was bogus, it wasn't a trial of
Mhm.
his peers. So it's just a matter of how we word what they're doing. But I'm a firm believer in they need to stand 10 toes deep on what they did. And I'll talk to you in the back channel about what you need to do, because I've been telling you that since the beginning of time.
And you know I'm not gonna stop, and I'm all ears.
That needs to happen, because they don't care about anything else. One thing I learned about racists, and I learned about racists, and I learned about racists, they don't mind doing racist behavior. They don't mind calling you racist. They don't mind racist policies. They don't mind racist procedures. But they don't like it when you put out there how they were racist and you detail what they actually did. They don't
Mhm.
mind on the actions, but they don't like being called it. They don't mind none of the action behind it. Call a racist person a racist and they'll be ready to, oh my, they don't like that. And that's what has to be done. We have to start calling these racists racist. And it's the gaslighting of the mental games that they play by you calling them that. Oh, you can't, oh, that's slander, that's libel. No, but you are actually racist. You did, this is the racist policy, this is the racist procedure, this is
Mhm.
how you handle it in court. This is racism. But they don't like it when you call it that. So we have to really start understanding who we're playing against and
Mhm.
how we're playing against them. You're going up against the whole entire court system. Like
Yeah.
again, I have a lawsuit against a branch of government in federal and state court. I'm one person. Do I think I can win? Yes, but how I win is important. So we have to really start understanding who the enemy is, and you have to. It's more than one way to skin a cat. That is what I'll tell. It's more than one way to skin a cat.
And I want
So
to put out the names of the people my husband was prosecuted by, because I feel like that's important.
it,
DA David Smith, Assistant DA Ethan Wilk, um, Dana Martini, a state trooper, and CPL Thomas out of Huntington County, Pennsylvania. I'm pretty sure that the people who need to hear those names
mhm.
or know those names, it'll get to who it needs to,
And
you
this
know?
is the thing. When you work for the public has a right. And this is what I don't think people understand. You work for the public. You don't work for yourself. You don't work for a private entity. You don't have this right to privacy when you're a public official.
No,
You
ma'am.
work for the public. Your job is to do, but you're locking up the public. You're violating the public.
When
You're being
Mariko was
corrupt.
arrested, we've been all over Google. I lost my home because of being unsafe, because there were threats coming in, shady stuff. We had to leave our home because you have now labeled my husband a murderer and put my address all over the internet.
And that's the thing about racism. They don't mind doing the racist activity, but they don't like it when you call them racist. They don't like it when you hold them accountable. And we have to start calling law enforcement, white supremacy, the KKK. We have to start calling them what they are, because they
They
get
are.
covered if you don't call them what. One thing about with my lawsuit, when I filed my complaints against the individuals, I was right out calling everybody what I was calling them. I was
Mhm.
making complaints from day one, and I was calling them what they were. And so now, years later, they can't say, well, you never reported the corruption. Yeah, I did. You never reported the official misconduct. Yeah, I did. You never reported the witness tampering or the official misconduct is lying in paperwork. You cannot file a false documentation.
You know what I wanted to read you when I opened this book before we started this? It said, on day one, as soon as I entered the trial, I spoke to the lawyer, And the DA withheld phone records of multiple individuals. Some of them confessed to these murders, and they had to have a discussion. We couldn't go straight in because they were having a motion about it in chambers. Our judge that we had during this whole thing, that from the start, there's been a lot of withholding stuff. There's stuff that DA has that is so prevalent to Morico's case. I know he has it. You know what I'm saying? That is so meaningful for Morico's case that he probably hasn't even turned over. We know that they do that. Okay.
And the reason why they do it, because they have a person who confessed to it. But if the FBI, the DEA are keeping him because they need him in play for these drugs because it's a drug case.
Well, Pennsylvania has the largest open drug market.
You see the videos in Philadelphia of the zombie apocalypse?
So don't get it twisted. This isn't caught up in some other stuff that we don't know about. There's been so much little stuff going on, the ACLU and stuff like that. It's been so much that they've been trying to expose it a little bit at a time. These people taking bribes behind. There's stuff that they're covering up. And my prayer is that the whole lot of it is busted open.
You have to be the one to expose it. And
I will be.
By putting out what was done to you and how it was done. And thank you for coming.
Thank you. Congratulations again.
Thank you. I'm going
for your run.
Have you back on an episode. We're gonna follow up with this case.
Amen.
So I put the information up there in regards to it. And thank you. I really appreciate you for joining me for this episode.
Thank you for inviting me. Really and truly, thank you. This was a start to me getting this story out again. You know?
Definitely.
We gotta keep it pushing.
I just want to thank everybody for listening, because although you might think I sit up here and diss and everything like that, I'm just a positive person trying to do a positive thing, trying to have a little bit of fun and make my mark in the world.